Okay. Head Start in Wisconsin serves about 12,000 children and their families. And these are our most vulnerable kids and families in the state. In Wisconsin, we have 41 grantees, 245 centers, employing about 4,500 staff, making us one of the largest employers in the state. And in many of our communities, Head Start is one of the only, or oftentimes the only licensed childcare provider. Head Start relies on over $204 million in federal funding, with just $6.2 million from state funding. And right now, in case anybody's been paying attention, there's a tremendous amount of federal uncertainty and instability. And who's most at risk is our most vulnerable kids. And in rural Wisconsin, that risk is really the most acute. We see in the northern region, 70% of providers have wait lists. Similarly in northeastern and western regions. These counties with the greatest gaps also have the greatest need. So in much of the state, there's really no other backup. And if Head Start disappears, that really leaves children with no other options. So the question is, in much of rural Wisconsin, Head Start, as I said, is one of the only licensed childcare providers. And with the federal uncertainty, what would your administration do to keep Head Start doors open for kids and families?
I think it's imperative that we assess this moment for what it is. And we are in a crisis moment because of the uncertainty and the turmoil that comes from the Trump regime. And it's important that the executive and the administration, your next governor, be relentless in wielding the full power of the executive to ensure that we assess the childcare crisis for what it is. I would be willing to call in the legislature to a special session to unlock the rainy day funds to ensure that there is additional emergency funding that would go into funding Head Start. I think it is imperative that, again, flexible, adequate funding that is not only a budget item, but looking at making sure that it's coming from a segregated fund and expanding investment into Head Start. But I think too, this has to come with increasing our shared revenue. Many of our local services that families depend on come at the county and local government levels, and increasing our shared revenue, making sure that counties and towns are funded adequately so that essential services are available for families. But I think making sure that I would want to make sure that the funding is, the emergency funding is available, that we call in the legislature to unlock funds where they are. We saw what happened this past year with the Head Start funding being cut. We saw people having to go into, I'm sorry, I need to keep looking at you. Heather, thank you for that, but willingness to use emergency funds, and absolutely.
The most important thing that our next governor is going to be doing is to protect our rights and freedoms from this dangerous authoritarian regime. I will use every tool at my disposal to protect us from the ways in which we are being harmed by the Trump administration as governor. You don't have to take my word on that. You can actually see what I have done over the years to stand up to bullies and billionaires and right-wingers. And Jenny, I want to thank you for answering the call, because when Donald Trump and the Republicans illegally were essentially stopping Head Start payments, and there was a question about whether providers were going to get their money, we thought that was an emergency and people needed to know about it. And we were organizing a press conference, and you helped and answered the call so that we could help people understand the connection of what this Doge nonsense was and how it was going to affect people's lives and our economy, including people who didn't have kids and Head Start, but it would still harm them. And that is really, really important. Yes, of course, we can use rainy day funds, and we should, for emergencies like this. But most importantly, we also have to be using the legal tools at our disposal. And as an attorney, I am so offended by what this regime is doing to undermine the rule of law. And that is why one of the things that I have pledged is that as governor, any federal agent, whether that's an ICE agent or a member of the Trump administration, that breaks our state laws will be prosecuted and held fully accountable, because nobody is above the law, and what they did was illegal.
Thank you. And so far, a lot of the ideas are very similar. What it takes is somebody who's going to act with urgency. That has typically been the problem, especially with our party. We haven't always governed with urgency. We let things happen to us and we go through the long drawn out thought process of how to respond. And it has made things much more difficult, it's made things much more challenging, and it's also eliminated opportunities for so many people in so many different ways because we're taking as much time as we have taken on an issue like Head Start. Then think about how many children slip through the cracks because there's no other options for them. And so I believe in everything that has been said before. What we do have is an opportunity through the budgeting process to make sure that there is money for an emergency situation like this, and also calling an emergency session of the legislature to respond to the crisis. But also, again, I'm glad you mentioned the legal strategy. We need to not just empower, but sometimes, put a little kick in the Attorney General's office to show up to do what is needed to be done when the White House, when the federal government, when Donald Trump does something out of spite that ultimately makes it harder for Wisconsinites to be able to achieve the American dream, which starts at an early age. And so whether it's the emergency funding or empowering the Attorney General's office, we have to take every step possible. I think those are the two easiest ways we can get it done.
You mentioned there's 12,000 kids in Head Start, and if I'm not mistaken, at least 2/3 of those kids are there so that their parents can be working. Like this is a workforce issue, and it's one that we absolutely need to deal with. And at best, what we're doing with Head Start, because of all the work that's gone on here and other places, we're standing still. Costs are not standing still. If we are still able to even get that $200 million, that doesn't mean that you can keep delivering the services you did last year, because we've had these other discussions around paying people and simply the costs of doing business. And I don't think we need to tap into a rainy day fund for this. Like, we have had discussions around a budget surplus. Now, we should be cautious around what that budget surplus is going to look like on June 30th. But rather than going into all kinds of machinations around a rainy day fund, there are dollars that should be available to do this as an emergency in the first days of the next administration. And that's what I'm going to do. You are going to be living for the next 6 months under an emergency that's gotten worse because of state inaction, because this bridge funding that was there was a bridge to nowhere. And we need to be in a position where we are going to meet those needs now. Ultimately, we are going to also need to be able to withstand the 24 months of the Trump administration that we are still going to have from January of this coming year until January of 2029. There you go. Thank you. So we need to make sure we're doing that, but there are emergency things that we can do today. And then it is about what the next budget is going to look like. And if you give me a few more allies in the legislature, we are going to be markedly different than what the last budgets have looked like in Wisconsin.
One of the scariest things that the next governor is going to be dealing with is how do you plug the holes that the federal government has created? It's not just around Head Start, it's around healthcare, it's around many different things. And so the next governor has to be prepared. And I want you all to know, as a county executive, I've not only fought against the Trump administration, but we've won. And I think that we need someone who's not only going to provide that emergency funding, but we need to create sustainability. Because I don't know about you, but when the federal government cuts programs, I don't see those programs coming back that quickly, right? And so we're talking about not just under the Trump administration, but who's going to be the next president to make sure these dollars are coming back to states across this country, under this. And if we don't defeat the Trump legacy, we know this is going to continue. And so the state has to step up and figure out how we're going to plug these gaps. As Joel said, and everybody has said, it's not just about the emergency funding or using the rainy day fund or using the surplus that we have. We need to make sure that we are fully fixing the Head Start problem so we can take care of our own kids. We can't continue to rely on the federal government, and the Trump administration is showing us that each and every single day. And so this is about seriously working directly with you all. I was told that when you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu. And many of you have not had a seat at the table. And so we need to make sure that we're listening directly to you to figure out how do we create a more sustainable program that we can invest in the state so we never have to rely on the federal government moving forward.